she own it. Looking like the world is your runway. She can set it off like a gunplay. Oh my, yeah. Talk of the city with that body. Always getting praised like it's Sunday. She said, baby, what you gonna do about it? Loving your vibe, girl. That energy got me going. Yeah, that thing's so vibrant. I wanna know if you can give me the keys to your heart, baby. All I need is you. All I need is you. You right next to me.
Good morning, beautiful people of the internet, and welcome once more to our Sunday special live. Not joined as always, but we have Abby. There you go.
Yay.
Not paying blindest bit of attention. We've got Adam Lawrence, Brain of Britain. We have Piotr Rusinek, the hunk of Lisbon. We have myself. In a second, Bubba. We have all of that. You'll realise that Abby's quite. I'm trying to think of the word. Yeah, that's what you want. Argumentative is probably the word. What I'm going to do is I'll stick myself on mic, on mute, and I'll jump in when I need to share something or argue something, which is likely. No, Bubba. But we don't have Helen today, so there's no Rose, just the Thorns. So we have more than 87% available for Mr. Lawrence to go through the supplement and tear the economy and politics and geopolitical situations to ruins. Adam, take it away.
What an invitation to treat that is, Jay. How lovely. So it's been a good week, really, and I tried not to rain too hard on the parade of a lot of the analysis that I read. Obviously, in the sort of mainstream headlines, it's very weak, as it always is. But if you were hiding under a rock, inflation was down to 4.6, which was great news. Even the most keen of forecasters only had it down at about 4.8 on average. And there was a few saying it might stay above 5. So 4.6 was a great print. Although when inflation loses a lot of pace, it's usually because there's quite a few disappointing things going on in the economy. Although not so much for October, because it was primarily based on the fact that the energy price cap dropped down significantly, 17% from the 1st of October. That's helped people massively at a time of year where their energy bills go up, obviously, because of heating going on, apart from anything else. And we've still got, as we had last year as well, a pretty mild winter. Hasn't been great for water, especially in certain parts of the UK. But the temperature has been pretty high, and we're still looking at, plus 10 degrees, which keeps the heating bills right down for people, apart from anything else in general. So that's good news. Core, a little bit more active, a little bit more aggressive. Of course, remember that core strips out food and energy because those are more volatile prices. And so, of course, when those that were dropping have been stripped out, core still remains high. But again, it printed still just below where the forecast was. So it's still 5.7. Not great, but it's not starting with a 6 or a 7. So that's pretty good news. You'd be much calmer if you saw it below 5. You'd feel a lot better. But Germany is still above 5 as well. So it's not like we're on our own of Western nations. But then services inflation and wages was the real sort of temper that I had to add in this week, because services inflation is 47% of the component of the CPI, because we have such a big services sector in the UK. And obviously, services prices are strongly linked to wages, because apart from anything else, what's a typical professional services company doing? It is selling expertise and time to its clients, whether that be an accountant or whether that be a plasterer. It's not the point that, God, the plasterer gets 350 quid a day. It's the point that the plasterer has learned his or her craft to a level whereby they can do in a day what would take you 3 weeks if you watched it on YouTube, and achieve a 500 times better finish, which is why they can command that £350 a day, right? So people in services companies and the owners of services companies are selling people's time to you on an hourly or a daily sort of basis, or a more ongoing basis sometimes, depending on the setup. So when those wage demands are high, then they try and recoup those by raising the prices that they can charge. And we're still at 7.7%. Now, those numbers only run to September because wages run a month behind, because that's where the ONS are at with things. But 7.7% was the annualized 3 months from July to September wage rises without bonuses, right? Now, that's obviously well above where the inflation rate was in October. And traditionally, and where people get concerned, and I had a little bit of a go at traditional economics this week because it's not always that helpful in these situations. You need more context. And the context here, of course, is that we had a long time where inflation, however you measured it, was well above wage rises. You know, we had a situation between about the middle of 2021 and the middle of 2023 where, so two long years, but not just the 2 years, but the gap was really, really significant. Sometimes it was 5% if you measured on one particular month, the difference between how much prices had gone up and how much wages had gone up. And that's really significant for people's standard of living. So the traditional economic viewpoint is to get very worried about wages, because wages drive what happens in a services company. When people want higher wages, prices of those services have to go up to pay those higher wages. What happens when those prices go up? Because services inflation is 47% of CPI, people need higher wages. That's the death spiral upwards, the wage price spiral that everybody worries about, and that the government used as the stick to beat the unions with over the course of the past 12, 14 months, right? We have to control it. And this is where, you know, you might remember Andrew Bailey made himself no friends by telling people not to ask for wage rises, despite getting paid £568,000 a year and not being that good at his job, which is obviously not ideal. So people are obviously pretty hacked off about that. And some union disputes are obviously still just sort of trailing on, but you can see by how much of them are in the press or not these days that largely most of those disputes have been resolved. Most of those disputes have included pay deals for next year already baked in. So very unlikely to see anywhere near as much social unrest as we were. And this below 5% is really, really good news, because high inflation damages the fabric of a country. And you see that as you go to the examples around the world, like the Venezuelas and the Argentinas, where they've got inflation in the thousands, tens of thousands, millions of percent potentially. It seriously impacts day-to-day life. You know, you can't buy a loaf of bread without pushing a pram of notes to the shop, and you can buy it at 9 o'clock in the morning and you can't afford it with the same money by 5 o'clock at night. I mean, it genuinely rips apart the fabric of society, which is why the Bank of England and the government are so keen to keep it under control. So it's a good thing. But with the standard of living having dropped over the past couple of years for the average person, who of course doesn't exist, but you know what I mean. With that having dropped, then as people get wage rises again and again, then all they're doing at the moment is they're catching up. You know, they're not going forward in real terms from where we were before the pandemic, or where we were certainly at the height of the stimulus hitting the economy. So that's a good thing, as it turns out, because it means some of those wage increases can be absorbed without them being inherently inflationary, right? The problem comes in that your average common or garden economist goes, well, this is okay, because what needs to happen at this point in the cycle is that the companies need to accept that they've got a lower rate of inflation, and therefore they can't put their prices up as much, so their margins have to be eroded. And corporates don't tend to think like that, especially in this day and age. They tend to think about the next 3 months' results, especially in the stock market. How do we manage the share price? The tacit job of all CEOs is that he or she manages the share price for the company as their number one job. You might not say that in the job description, but that's the reality of it, because it's so important they keep their investors on board, they keep their institutional investors happy, and all the rest of that. So that's the number one job. So they're not just going to roll over and say, okay, well, thinner margins, there we go. Sorry, investors, we just didn't quite make as much money this year, because that's not what keeps you in a 400, 500,000 £1 million plus a year job. Ultimately, it'll see you out to pasture pretty quickly, quicker than you would like when you've reached the top of the tree in the corporate world. So what actually is going to happen in real life is what's already started at the very big companies, which is we've already had people stopping hiring, and we've had nearly 12 months of fewer and fewer vacancies in the job market. We've gone from 1.3 million vacancies all the way down to 958,000. So that's quite a big drop. Now, pre-pandemic, the highest number of vacancies we ever had was 865,000. So that puts it into context. It's still above that level, but it's been trimmed back significantly. And when you break down the figures, go right into the figures, it's the smallest companies that are hiring fewer people even faster. And the number one and the number three sectors that the ONS divide all the stats into that are cutting hires at the moment over the past 3 months have been real estate activities. Number one, massive drop in available vacancies, 35% fewer jobs than there were. And number three, construction, where there's 10.2% fewer jobs than there were 3 months ago. So perhaps that won't surprise anybody. And also we do need to be cautious because there's seasonality, of course, in that. Estate agency particularly traditionally has a tough time in the first quarter of a new year because everybody's pushed and pushed and pushed to move before Christmas. They want to be in their new homes before Christmas. And then a new glut of stock hits the market on Boxing Day when everyone's bored of the family and all the rest of it. But of course, that's when it hits the market. It doesn't transact until 5 or 6 months later. So the money isn't dropping into the accounts of the estate agents in the first quarter of the year. And therefore, they're trying to cut heads. They're not trying to recruit new people at this sort of time of year. So we do need to beware the seasonality effect on the property industry. But still, 35% is a big deal. You know, it's a big deal. So services inflation was still running at 6.6%, which is pretty congruent with the last 3 months. And it hasn't lost all of that pace like CPI has, because it hasn't had that event where the price cap has come off the top of the energy market and therefore domestic energy prices have gone down significantly. Where is that event that controls it? We don't really know. So traditionally, as I've said in the supplement this week, wage rises are dictated by people's expectations. If they think inflation is under control, and that's the narrative that they believe in, and of course, this is why Sunak made it one of his 5 pledges, because he knew that October 22 was so bad that October 23 would likely be better on the back of things that were completely out of his control, because he doesn't control the energy price market. Of course he doesn't. And of course, if it goes wrong, he just blames the Bank of England. So it was a bit of a free bet for him, and he's achieved at least one of his outcomes there. The other 4 are a different kettle of fish, really. But he's achieved one of his outcomes, and it's going to drop towards the end of the year in CPI anyway, which is a good thing. But if services inflation is still 6.6 and wages are 7.7, you can see, first of all, there is a little erosion of the corporate margin going on there, because if your biggest cost base is wages and they're going up 7.7 and your prices are going up 6.6, you probably are suffering from a margin perspective, although you might be able to make cost savings. And this is what's happening at the big companies. They're cutting heads. They're not just stopping and slowing recruitment. That's what's been happening for the past 12 months. They're now cutting heads because they realise if they want to deliver at the same margin or improve figures for the next year, they've got to either do the same work with a few percent lower headcount, because we'll get to January and the salary negotiations will start and people will be going, I still need 5%, 7% to try and catch up with where inflation has put me. Although that's not the company's problem. That's the sort of conversation that people are going to be having, right? And that'll be the first port of call. And if you don't want to erode your margins and you don't want to lose your own bonus, or you don't want to work for less money, which few people in business that I know want to do the same work or work harder for the same money. That's basically the proposition that you're looking at. Mm-hmm. You've really got to cut heads and you've got to improve productivity. Now, of course, you could say, well, AI could help improve productivity in many firms.
I was going to say that, but you're doing really well.
Yeah, but and AI will improve productivity in firms, but is it ready at the moment? A lot of the stuff we've tried to do with it, it's good, it's passable, but it still needs a lot of human intervention. Now, it might well be able to do a lot in terms of writing copy for marketing, for example, because it can just produce output so very quickly. And I'm one of the people who believes hardly anybody reads anything in detail anymore, which seems a bit perverse when I produce 2, 3, 4, 5,000 words of content on a Sunday morning. I know. Although I do know that quite a few people read it very carefully, and I thank those who do. But for doing that, and it helps me to organise my thoughts well, as I've said before. But AI, is it ready to really push productivity forward next year? Because goodness knows the UK economy could really do with that. I don't think it is. I think most of the thinking out there says it's really going to be 2 or 3 years before. And if you think back to massive discoveries of the recent past or epiphanies, which would include renewable energy, which would include things like graphene. Do you remember when graphene was discovered and it was, going to be the next big thing? And that was 15 years ago? And it hasn't made that much of an impact as a super material or whatever, although it does have uses in various things. AI will be like that, I think.
Yeah, it's changing so much, but it also requires people like us to learn a lot about it, how to use it, and then the more we learn how to use it, the more the companies that produce AI kind of learn how to adjust it and how to make it easier to use and stuff like that. So it is a bit of a learning process, and will take like 2-3 years for people to actually be able to properly use it. But it's a learning process.
Look at Bitcoin. It was a minority thing for probably 8 years before sort of 2017 before it really started to take off, even though it came out in 2009, and it still wobbles and pitches and yaws, and people still aren't really sure about the utility of it, and it's still more of a gambling tool than it is a truly and really the blockchain, which everybody has always said all along is the big thing to come out of Bitcoin, rather than Bitcoin itself, which is a bit more like a cult really than anything else. The blockchain and its implications would be, but we still live in a world where you can't search the land registry for Adam Lawrence. And then you wouldn't be able to tell if that was this Adam Lawrence or another Adam Lawrence anyway. And we've got, remember, the most revered and respected land registry in the world. So we're millions of miles ahead of stuff like that. So change at that level. If you think, Jay will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the precedent case about e-signatures was taken to court in 2003. And so we're 20 years further on from that precedent case that e-signatures are legally binding, and people still don't want to use e-signatures. 20 years. So we can't just expect 2024 if suddenly AI solutions to rain down from the skies and we're all on universal basic income and everything's all wonderful. It's going to take years to implement and use properly. And I think one of the wisest things that I've heard said is your job's not going to be replaced by AI, but your job might well be replaced by someone using AI to do your job better than you do. And that's where the real lesson is for me. And of course, this week, OpenAI, who are the creators of the wonderful ChatGPT, have lost their CEO, haven't they? Sam Altman has been stood down, and there's change at the top.
That was the first person who lost job because of AI.
Oh, the irony is just utterly crushing, isn't it? Really.
One of the things interesting, Adam, about the e-signatures is we're selling something at the moment. Well, we're trading something, as we tend to be doing. We're trading something, and I was sent the TR1 form just to do the standard, just getting everything ready. Very good, Bubba. The solicitor had sent me the TR1 as if, myself and Piotr signed as if we were in front of each other. But Piotr's abroad, so you had to then resend a new TR1 for me to sign and have a witness sign it.
Yeah.
So I thought it's been a little while since I've done it. We normally leave all the practical stuff up to Piotr. So I was, yes, Bubba. So I went on to the HMRC website, Section 8, guidance on how to complete the form, and they have a whole section on there about e-signatures and how to complete the document using an e-signature. So HMRC accept e-signatures. Companies House accept e-signatures. The problem is solicitors do not like e-signatures. So
do the land Do the land reg not? I was told the last time I asked, which is a while actually, that the land reg still don't accept them. Do you know what their position is on them?
I didn't actually look at that, but that's actually a really good point. But I mean, before you even get to land reg, you kind of have to.
Yeah.
You've got other barriers to cross, right? It's just
you need your gatekeeper of the land reg to be on board with you. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you find that actually it's the process and the guidance from the solicitors that kind of, and it may be that they're mirroring what land reg is saying, but on the HMRC side, they're absolutely fine with it.
Well, the whole, I mean, the solicitor gatekeeper thing is so interesting because I've heard this week of several instances of solicitors giving tax advice that's wrong, by the way, giving tax advice that's wrong, stepping in to tell people how to do deals because they've done a few deals themselves. This is like, guys, I mean, if you, apart from anything else, your professional indemnity insurer would be utterly horrified if they heard what was going on. But what about, you know, duty of care to the client? It's wrong. What you're saying is wrong. It's insane. But
one of the things that I look out for when we're dealing with a new solicitor, which is rare, we have a pool of 3 or 4 that we split business between, depending on what we have. But any solicitor we approach, then we talk about, you know, we're trading. If we're back to backing, we say, no, well, this is self-cert. It's a sub-sell tax relief. We're not paying any stamp duty. The moment they start to try and advise us on tax, I'm like, okay, we can't use this solicitor again, because any reasonable solicitor will stand back and go, I can't tell you what's right or wrong here. You need to get proper advice. And it's not a very small thing. It's one of the things at the very end of a conversation. One of the things at the very end of a conversation, it tells you whether you're dealing with a proper solicitor or not a pretender, just someone who's trying to get too busy on things.
And yeah, someone who's trying to say they know more than they do. I totally agree. And where you struggle as well sometimes, and this is the problem with the larger firms sometimes, they won't necessarily proceed without written tax advice. I had a case several years ago where the stamp duty we were being told we had to pay, and we had to use this particular solicitor. It was to do with our SAS pension. And we got so far down the line, it was quite complex. We were splitting the titles. We were doing a whole variety of things, and we didn't want to change. And he told me, look, the stamp duty you've got to pay is 2,000 quid. And I knew he was wrong, right? I knew there was no stamp to pay on this transaction. So I argued tooth and nail with him, as you'd expect, for the sake of the 2,000 quid. And he said, look, if you can proceed with written tax advice from a chartered tax advisor, you can supply me with that, then I will do the transaction. And I said, look, I'm not being rude, but my tax position is my own. I'm responsible for my tax position, and I'm comfortable that this is correct. And he said, well, I don't care about that. I want the written advice, otherwise we won't proceed. So I had a quote for the written advice, and irony of ironies, the written advice was £2,400. So it was cheaper not to get the written advice and just pay the SDLT and get on with the transaction. And of course, look at reclaiming that SDLT further down the line, which is the alternative in that. But what do you think happened with that solicitor? Never used them again, never would, because it's just, if I'm happy to I'm happy to put in writing, I take 100% responsibility for my tax position, which, as it goes, exactly. And that's one of the big things that's come up with the whole damn needle tax policy associates conversation with various companies that's been going on for the past 6 weeks or so. Of course, you're responsible, just like you're responsible as a landlord. If the agent does something for you, the agent is working on your behalf, but in the nicest possible way, it's your head on the block, isn't it? That's the way it is. So that's what you've got to get used to. So why are you then, because you're incredibly nervous of litigation, and we still don't live in a massively litigious society, but why are you then trying to defend yourself from litigation that's not going to happen? I'm asking you, Mr. Solicitor or Mrs. Solicitor, for an execution service is what I'm asking you for. I'm not asking you for legal advice. Generally speaking, in conveyancing, you are talking about an execution service, which is why it's cheap. They don't have to advise on things left, right and centre. And this is why people are horrified when the solicitor tells them it's 500 quid or 750 quid to review the auction legal pack, because they've got to do advice. They're not doing an execution service. They've got to do bespoke advice. If they're following a conveyancing transaction, then they're going through their sausage machine process that they've been through hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of times before, that any well-organized firm will have a process map or an online version or whatever, and there'll be gates to be kept in that map whereby priority searches are done, whereby TR1s go out for signature, and it's either to both or to one with a witness or whatever it is. And it always amazes me what some solicitors will or won't do. It's very similar to building contractors. You know, one building contractor never goes around and looks at another's work and goes, oh, that's a fine job he's done there. That's amazing. That's wonderful. They'll always go around and pick all the faults with it, won't they? And solicitors are exactly the same. They'll go around and say, well, they shouldn't really have done, ooh, sort of suck their teeth, you know, shouldn't really have done that well, or that's illegal, or that's something else. Now, obviously, some of those, obviously, solicitors do things that are illegal. Don't get me wrong, sometimes. But in my experience, it's very, very rare that they do. We did have a chap once who was very cheap on conveyancing, and he was quite useful for 6 or 7 transactions. And then he got struck off, which wasn't ideal. Not for something he did in one of our cases, but it then made me realise, what bodies do we not know are buried in those 6 or 7 cases that have been rushed through? And actually, we were lucky; there wasn't anything. But there so easily could have been something really significant. Likewise, in the past, I've used conveyancers who just take on work like typical contractors and never say no to a case, and are managing like 158 cases at a time or something insane. And then big things have been missed. But in the spirit of, depending on what it is, I'm also a big enough boy to say, should I litigate here? Is there really clear loss and all the rest of it? And quite often in these cases, the loss hasn't necessarily been realised. It hasn't. So what are you going to do? Are you going to then give up trying to fix the problem so that you can prove that there's a loss so that you can litigate? It doesn't make sense. I was talking over the past couple of days, we've been running a sourcing course, myself and Nick Bond and Dan Kennedy. And I was talking about a property that we once exchanged on in Gerrard's Cross that was a scam. And that was actually the first time I got to talk to Samir Patel, who'd also been scammed by the same person, as it turns out. And it had taken Samir 5 years to get the money back by pursuing and it actually came back from the SRA in the end. But that's how long the claim took to process. And the amount, I mean, don't get me wrong, in that case, there was hundreds of thousands of pounds involved. You're not going to let it go. It's going to be worth pursuing. But still, that case over those 5 years will have taken a good chunk of non-income generating time out of anybody who's ever considering litigation. And I wouldn't say never do it. And I think you certainly need to be able to be comfortable with doing it. It's part of the game as time carries on, certainly on particularly difficult cases. One of the things I've got to do on Monday morning is look at a dispute resolution. I'm really looking forward to that. But that'll be a big fat waste of time that doesn't generate income. But there we go. It's got to be done. But if you ever fancy going into a long and complicated case, I'd highly recommend watching the programme Robbie's War on iPlayer, if it's still on there. It's about Robbie Chenguiz and a massive property empire that the Chenguiz brothers had. And this court case that Robbie basically got totally and utterly obsessed with. It consumed him for over a decade, and he ended up losing everything because his singular focus on this court case and righting the wrong that had happened just ruined him. So sometimes it's very similar to if you've ever had to pay a tenant to give up the keys for the property, cash for keys or whatever you want to call it, even if they are £4,000 in arrears and have trashed the property, it still might commercially be the best thing for you to do. Now, if it's a bitter pill to swallow, well, that's what it is. If you want to be a professional landlord, you've got to make difficult commercial decisions sometimes, right? If you're not going to do that on principle because you're so rich you don't care, in a way, good for you, right, in a way. But if it's stressing you out, if it's having an impact on your physical health and your mental health, I would question whether it's really worth it, you know? So it's a fine balance when you get involved in pointing the finger at people. And you guys will know we're all on the same page on this one. We're not big on blaming other people for things that go wrong. We look at ourselves and we work out how we can improve, and we stand up and try and improve ourselves. And that's the whole central philosophy of that's the Peterson hook, right? That's it right there. clean your room, sort your life out before you go on a protest march, etc., etc., etc.
Exactly. We've got a few interesting comments. One from Bushra. Good morning, gents. Very true, Adam. Some legal departments have got rid of the property team, sadly.
And you can sort of understand it, can't you? Because unless you are doing big work with buildings that are, or portfolios that are millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of pounds, then the fees for conveyancing are so low. And it's a bit like EPCs. You know, there's some really good EPC assessors out there who know loads about buildings, who are as knowledgeable as your average surveyor would be, who are unbelievable. But the fact they have to consider working for 45 quid, which includes VAT, and some of that is going to their parent company, what the hell can you expect in terms of standards for that? So this is what sometimes I remember hearing years ago, one of the big banks was paying for remortgages. They were paying a legal firm that they used for those remortgages £35 a case. £35. Now, how could a services firm, and this is a company that would have hundreds of thousands of remortgages every year, right? So, of course, we're talking about serious revenue. We're talking about millions in revenue, if not tens of millions. But where would the margin be at 35 quid? How could there be any? And what sort of time? I mean, they must be spending 15 to 20 minutes on the case. They can't be spending any more time than that to run a services firm. You've got to pay people. They've got to have desks. You've got to have insurance. You've got to have people managing people. You've got to have all of the structure. You've got to have you've got to have the professional body memberships. It can't make sense. But if you always shop on lowest price, I can see why partners of law firms would look at conveyancing and go, this isn't for us. Or the medium-sized ones look at it and go, well, look, there might be people you can get for 500 quid, right? But we're 850 or we're 1150 or we're at 999 or whatever we are. Get on with it. If you're shopping on price, go away. And which is the way that I prefer to do business. If you want to be the lowest price that's like being the highest payer of the interest rate you pay to your investors. What a crazy place to put yourself in, because all you're going to do is give away all your profit and put yourself under pressure.
Yeah, and also from Bushra, but this time on Facebook. Bushra, you're running two windows on your thing. One comment from YouTube, one comment from Facebook. But this is about the problem with e-signatures. We also have to make sure SLA rules and PI is okay with it. Crazy.
Understand. Well done for double platforming though. That's getting our views up, Bushra. Well done, full marks for that. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Well, some comments from LinkedIn as well, from Helen. There's everyday increase of warning about AI. There is, and actually that case of firing the Sam Altman was apparently partly about him going for the profits instead of the safety too much, and that's kind of like the main non-publicized reason about him being fired.
Interesting.
Good. And one more question, not question, but comment from Hanin regarding sales fees when it comes to auction. Should be a package offer, including the package review. Things have to change to support a sustainable system. At the moment, the cost is getting higher, out of control, which will affect the market in the long run and stop.
And I do know, I've thought this for a long time, but I do know a few firms who offer this these days, where it'll be, maybe it's 500 quid to review the legal pack, but if you buy it, 250 quid of that will be contributed towards your conveyancing fee or something like that, which is a very reasonable way of doing it. Although there are new competitors, I believe, in what was the space, although Aukspace is no more. I think is there auctionlegalpacks.co.uk, is that, or .com? That seems to be one. I'm not sure how much they charge. And of course, these things can work because they can be very disruptive. It's a bit like the way that black circles have worked in tyres, or, if they can drive enough volume, then they can get solicitors who, in their spare time, want to earn a few extra quid. and they'll actually do the work. So they're cutting out the partners of the firms, really, is what they're doing by achieving this. But of course, you have to be careful about if you want someone to read a legal pack so that you can sue them, right? Then I don't think using one of those companies that's popped up and might not last in the space is going to be the right way to do it. If you're looking at, and you have to look at the risk versus the GDV, don't you? And the outlay that you're looking to put in. If you only buy, like we would, 1 in 20 or 25 properties that you bid on at auction, right? Then if you add 500 quid to every single one of those, then to every auction purchase, you're adding 12.5 grand or something like that, which means you'd have to knock down what you were paying by more and you'd buy fewer properties. So at the 100 grand level, you don't necessarily need to do that. If you're going to buy a building or a portfolio, 1, 2, 3, 4 million quid through auction, and then I don't think we need to be having a conversation about how much the legal fees are for your solicitor to review the pack, ultimately. It's horses for courses, isn't it?
Yeah, and also I think a lot of people, it's like being a beginner wanting to review auction legal packs can be expensive, but professional buyers, they would have their own solicitors who would just review the legal packs for them for fairly cheap because of the volume of work. And also they would require only certain parts to be reviewed, or they would ask specific questions. So it would be very different. And I think auctions are kind of meant to be a little bit for professionals rather than just for beginners. And beginners, unfortunately, have to pay for education.
But I know you guys would also say that it's also what's not in the pack that's really the problem, rather than what's in the pack as a general rule. Always have a look at the special conditions and try and figure out for yourself what they mean. You've got to, because you've got to take that level of responsibility. But what's not in the pack and what's missing, and as you say, Piotr, that is, you don't know what you don't know, so you need to educate yourself around stuff like. If only there was a great book on auctions that someone had written that at this point. Oh, just looking at. Nicely done, Jay. Nicely done. Well modelled, sir. Well modelled. You scrubbed up well this morning.
Amazing.
Brilliant.
Well, great. A couple of more comments. Someone from LinkedIn is asking, morning Adam, if you could repeat the iPlay title and overview again, would be great. So I think it's the title that's the issue, right? What was the title? The Rob? Or
what was the title of what? Sorry,
the title of the iPlayer movie you mentioned.
Oh, Robbie's War. It's called Robbie Robbie. Robbie's War. And Chenguiz has got a very particular spelling. You can read about it online as well. So Chenguiz is like TCHENGUIZ, I think, if you haven't heard of the Chenguiz brothers.
So it's Robbie's War, the rise and fall of a playboy billionaire.
There you go. There you go. But it's the obsession with the litigation that gets to him. So that's well worth looking into. You know what? We've got nearly 40 minutes in and we haven't yet mentioned the cabinet reshuffle, which is quite impressive. And also not that impressive if you think about it. I remember I heard about it first, and I heard that Cameron was coming back, and I was like, hang on a second, he's not an MP. And then I must say, despite studying politics as part of my degree, I wasn't aware of quite how many non-members of Parliament had been in front bench positions, even in the past 50 years or so, and even under the Blair administration. You know, Mandelson was in a front bench position. So, there's hope for me being Chancellor of the Exchequer yet without being an elected MP. So you never know what could happen. Although I think I'd prefer a wild card seat on the Monetary Policy Committee at the Bank of England, if anybody wants to make that happen, which is good news. But B, I wondered how you guys felt about that, really, because there's a number of different ways that you can feel about Cameron and that whole scenario, and what you think about what Sunak's done this week, really.
I find it difficult to comment.
So this is actually really very interesting. I thought that Rishi Sunak, when he sacked Suella, she sent this scathing letter, or at least everyone's been saying it's so scathing, he appointed David Cameron, and I saw that was him trying to move a very right, what was becoming a very, very rightist party, a little bit more central. And the way that she basically said, I think you have no intention of doing this disgusting thing, this deplorable thing, this thing that's against the cause of humanity. I thought that was more her saying, this was all my fault. Hands are now clean. I thought, well, that's amazing. Like how they positioned that perfectly. And then Rishi went to court and still is trying to push people over to Rwanda. And I thought some people just don't want to take the bone that they're given and go, right, well, actually, if we're a little bit more central, most people tend to sit in the center. You know, you may have an extremist view here or there, but generally speaking, you're going to be somewhere in the middle. So if you're a competent party, which there isn't one yet, that's sitting in the center, that is paying attention to the voice of the people, you've got a good chance of being re-elected. Got no chance of that now. Not that I think that's a real struggle.
This is an interesting thing. Not this interesting thing here, but it's an interesting thing because you're dead right. Elections historically are always won from the centre. And then I've heard some commentary this week saying, well, that wasn't the case with Boris because like painting Boris as some kind of right-wing lunatic. But Boris has been a liberal all his life. You know, he's always been, he does have some fairly crazy views, but the big government that Boris wanted is not in line with the hardline conservative, near libertarian kind of views where you shrink government within an inch of its life. No one seems to talk about what's true anymore in these situations. I mean, I wouldn't have thought people saw Boris as any kind of, Boris has been a staunch defender of immigration in the right numbers. You know, he talks about bringing people in with the right skills and all the rest of it. What do you think? Imogen's been swimming, which is much more ideal, isn't it, than talking about the front and back benches of the cabinet. And then, of course, you know, Starmer had his challenges as well, didn't he? Because he had his 12 of his front benchers sacking it off because of his position on Israel and Palestine, and the chat around all of that. And I'm still reeling from the fact that we think we're having a meaningful vote about what's going on in the Middle East. I just can't get my head around that. I just think it's lovely to think that Hamas and Israel really care about what the UK think. But our influence is, even compared to when Cameron first took over the Conservative Party, our influence has been diluted by such a large amount. You know, we are just the lapdogs of the US if we're lucky to sweep up after them, aren't we? I don't know.
But I think also Keir Starmer was quite right in telling the whips to push that party line quite so hard, because the majority of the people that have left, the majority are on the far left. We're talking about the Supreme Socialists. So what he's done is he's basically cleared out the cabinet he couldn't have got in without them. And now he's tried to move his party central. So this is it's a really good game of chess. I mean, one's playing it slightly better than the other. But
so he's done that. He's done that without upsetting the far left because they've just taken themselves out to pasture. That's a really good point, actually. And I've criticised him in the past for not being strong enough to get rid of the shadow of the Corbyn government, and they've kind of done it for him. Whereas what you're saying is Sunak could have done the same and come back to the centre, but instead he's staying over to the right. I mean, this whole as well, Braverman knows where the bodies are buried or whatever. I mean, I read the letter and just thought, yeah, okay, fair enough. And like you, then I was like, okay, so what are we going to do going forward? There's a more extreme position around all of that than there seems to be from Republican candidates who are looking to get elected for president next year. So I don't know if you saw, but next year, assuming that the election is 2024, and of course it could be Jan 2025, although that would look like just the most abjectly ridiculous hanging on by the end of their fingernails scenario. But assuming the election is 2024, there's more elections in democracies next year than there's been for 60 years.
Really?
Because you've got the US, you've got what's going on in Europe, you've got incredible potential upheaval, and that means you've got guaranteed market uncertainty apart from anything else, which would be more relevant for stocks and commodities than it would be for property. But you know what happens when we're certainly 12 weeks out from an election? You know, the market tends to freeze up a bit, doesn't it? And the transaction volumes tend to drop. But the more time goes on, the more I'm wondering if the market won't start too badly in 2024, because the bond yields had such a good week. You know, we've got to mention them. You know, they're down to under 4% on Thursday night, and then we touched 3.85 on the 5-year on Friday in early trading. And I think that's really low when the base rate is 5.25. But it bodes well for 4.5% limited company mortgages coming back relatively soon, you know, relatively soon.
I think December auctions are like probably, I'm not saying the last time to buy really good deals, but it's still an amazing time to buy great deals, because everyone's expecting things to go badly. But all the things that are in the background that will then show up in 3 months or 6 months are better and better. And that will improve things. So like December, I think it's going to be super good for buying things, because low competition, good deals, and still things are going to improve in like 3 to 6 months.
And it used to be the case that the really, really busy auctions would be in February, which was sometimes the last main auction before end of year accounts, right? So if you had, you know, if you're a company and you had excess and you needed to deploy, that would be your last chance in February. So February was, for one of those reasons, was really, really good to buy. But actually now people are getting in ahead of that tombstone and going, right, well, December is now good, because there is sometimes, well, depending on the asset and how it's marketed, there is less competition.
I strongly agree with that. I think that's a really, really good bit of insight. I just wondered if, I don't know if you guys know, how long is the home REIT disposal going to take? And do you think, on the back of that, do you think that's had a meaningful impact on the auction market over the past few months?
Had a meaningful impact on all SOPs. But their sales, the thing is, of the home REIT stuff that we can identify in the catalogue, they're selling about half of it. Yeah. So they're flooding one catalogue and they're only selling half of that stock. Now, that may be that they put that into rotation, in 6 months' time, you'll see it come around again at a slightly different price point, which is, if I was asset managing, that would be the route that I would take. But it's difficult to say at the moment.
Why would you wait 6 months? Why would you wait 6 months, Jay? Just out of interest.
Just goldfish memories for most people. Yeah. You know, wait 6 months, take a picture from a different angle. It's a brand new property. But 6 months is also enough time to let the grass grow under it and to really see what the value is. Because if you're selling number 6 Acacia Drive that you own and it doesn't sell, and then 3 months later you sell number 12 Acacia Drive that you own and that sells, you now have a price point and a marketing metric. I'm loving the nodding. It's really encouraging stuff. You have a price market that you can now go, right, now I can dispose at this kind of level if I'm aggressive on the pricing enough. And then there's some concerns about how aggressive they're pricing, because at the moment they're only selling about anywhere between 60 to 70% of what they paid for it up to 3 years ago.
So she's been reading the Sunday supplement.
That's it. I think Imogen's writing the Sunday supplement. It's just Daddy that's nodding. He's kicking it off. Imogen is the brains. Yeah. Daddy's nodding again. Yeah, it's all in there.
That makes sense. So I saw from a few of the headlines, they're selling at 65% lower than the strike prices and stuff like that. And I mean, the losses are just going to be, I can't imagine bigger loss in property than what Home REIT have done, and what the people who've skimmed the money out of the whole transactions have done. And it's such a good lesson to learn there, I think, for people, because I've always said this about commercial valuations. You know, commercial valuations are fabulous if you have stability, if you are sophisticated, if you have liquidity. I mean, if you imagine, if you think about the commercial property market for the last 4 years, right? You had 2020 where they had arrears at what was it, about 50%, something like that across the board at certain points, you know, the most incredible levels of arrears. And then you've had, since middle of 2022, what's happened to all the yields, and therefore a dramatic drop in the real value of commercial property, a lot of which has not been absorbed or shown itself in the market. And people have kind of gone, well, you know, nothing to see here. And of course, big commercial players don't have huge loan to value, maybe fix their debt for long positions into early 2022. So they don't have the interest rate pressure, but they have got sensitivity to the interest rate in terms of the value of the property. And the industry has actually probably deserves quite a bit of credit for the way it's done what it did leading up to 2008 and kept quiet. But it does look like they might largely have got away with it. Although I must say, one of the things that I put a post up this week, or it might have just been a comment actually on one of the socials, about the fact that it's just so heartbreakingly destroying when you do the research, write a post or write something like the supplement, you know, several thousand words, primary research, your best thoughts, your best foot forward, and you get 14 likes and a couple of comments or whatever. And then you share a screenshot where someone's called me fat, bald, whatever, and I get 3,000 likes and several shares. Now, I mean, I can take issue with the bald, I think, more than anything else. But, you know, that's just what social media is. And you kind of have to sort of shrug your shoulders and get on with it. But that's the same problem that we're seeing here, the depth and what's really needed in analysis and what's going on. I think that December comment particularly is something that really people should take away from today. But if you're using commercial valuations, when you use them, being up at the sort of 75% LTV level, if your lenders are people like Shawbrook, and I'm not picking on Shawbrook, they have a deliberate place in the market. But if there was to be a dramatic revaluation, you're not in the same position as you are if you've got a 5-year fix on a buy-to-let, or you're with a lender where that revaluation clauses are not within that deal. I was telling a story yesterday as well about a very mini portfolio loan that we took with a bridging lender. I won't embarrass them by naming them on air, but you guys will know who it is immediately. Business partner and I bought 3 properties out of receivership. Middle of last year, maybe early 2022, right? They were 100k each, and they were worth, as they stood, 130, 140k, something like that each. So pretty good deal. Happy to buy it. Funded it with bridge, 85% of the purchase price provided by the bridger. Very short time scale, because receivers, it might even have been 7 days, but it might have been 14. We agreed to do one loan, keep the paperwork down, keep it easy. That was the way it was sold to us. One of those 3, they were all tenanted. 2 were tenanted, 1 was void, right? The one that was void, we were actually able to add an extra bedroom. The old classic, you know, no extension needed, just a great bit of value creation in that property, bit of reorganisation where we moved the bathroom. You know, the bathroom, you could play tennis in the bathroom or whatever, so you didn't need to reorganise the property, got it sorted. Nice classic value add, did well on that one. Then one of the other ones was tenanted, but it was in good condition. So we refinanced those 2 within the 12 months we had the bridge for. The third one, we had the worst tenant we've ever had, incredibly abusive, awful to the tenancy manager, really, really, really bad communications, a really toxic individual. And they managed to put all the strokes in the book, including breathing space during the Section 8, which is a problem that people are facing more and more. The breathing space rules are getting abused. You know, something's brought in which is supposed to protect mental health, and all that happens is the sharp people defending these kind of people at all costs, even though we sent them screenshots and voice recordings and text of the correspondence that had been going on, and it was really, really vile, one-way vile, to be clear. We weren't going to sort this out within the 12 months, so the bridge was going to roll over. And the bridger tried to charge us our rollover percentage, because we don't enter into bridges that have got default rates. because it's dangerous, right? We enter into bridges where there's a penalty for rolling over, right? We accepted we were going to roll over. We also accepted, because it was effectively a mini portfolio bridge, the two that we had sorted out within the 12 months, the refinancing proceeds were 100% taken off the bridging loan. So I think we had about 35k left on the bridging loan, and we've got a property that's worth 130 to 140. So we've got plenty of headroom. What the bridger tried to do is apply my rollover percentage to the entire original loan because it's in the paperwork. So I phoned our mutual friend, one of the people there who looks after my business, and I said, can I just ask a question? How many bridges have I done with you guys now? And the answer was something like 171 or something ridiculous like that. I said, right, okay. Does it seem right to you, to a client who's done 171 bridges, that basically the rollover was nearly going to be as much as what the outstanding loan was at the time? And I was like, we'll wind back the clock and I'll just pay off the 36k or whatever's outstanding. This is insane. And sure enough, after quite a bit of wrangling, it got agreed that would be as a matter of goodwill forgiven. I was like, hold on, you talked me into the cross-collateralized 3-property loan in the first place. So I didn't ask for it. You asked me to do it because of the speed. And I said yes on the basis that we've got a good relationship. Whereas next time I'm going to have to stamp my feet and go, sorry, you're charging me the same money, so do 3 loans and do 3 times the paperwork and we'll all pay a bit more. Or can you change that fairly pernicious clause in your contract? Because that doesn't seem fair. It's interest only anyway. We're servicing the debt. So whatever's outstanding, surely we can roll over on whatever's outstanding. And we got there in the end, but it sours things a bit when you have to spend, the best part of a couple of weeks on and off fighting for something that you think is just reasonable, especially when you've given a company, that much business and have always paid your obligations. It seems ridiculous, doesn't it? But there we go.
There we go. Well, it's 10 o'clock and Abby and I'm Imogen. I've got new fans. I think we need to have you back, guys.
What do you think about that?
Have you every Sunday, 9 a.m., okay? See you next week.
Deal?
Deal? Amazing. Well, everyone, thanks for the comments. Hanin and Michelle, Bushra, and also Rakiba and Ivona and everyone else who commented. Great to see engagement. Evelina, so many people commented today. It's been a brilliant chat. Thanks for our guests for joining, and see you all guys next week. Have a great Sunday.